Coordinator Ash had seen many disasters in his 3 centuries of service. His crystalline body reflected the emergency lights of the command center in dancing patterns as he monitored the situation at Station Theta 9. The dimensional rift had torn through the station without warning, trapping hundreds of beings from 17 different species in collapsed corridors and sealed compartments. Some were injured. Some were dying. All of them needed help. The emergency services had protocols for this. Good protocols. Protocols that had been refined over thousands of years by the most advanced civilizations in known space. Every sapient being had infinite value. Every life deserved the same care and attention. The medical teams would assess each victim carefully, treat them properly, and move on to the next. It took time, but it was the right way. The moral way. Ash watched his teams work through the holographic displays. 12 hours had passed since the incident. They had successfully stabilized 23 individuals. The harmonious collective medical team worked with their usual precision, honoring each patient with full diagnostic scans and complete treatment protocols. The empaths from Sanctuary Prime provided emotional support while the physical injuries were addressed. Everything was proceeding according to procedure. Then the humans arrived. Ash had heard about humanity's recent admission to the IES. Earth was a young world, barely past its own planetary conflicts. They had only discovered dimensional travel 15 years ago. Many council members had questioned whether humans were ready for membership in such an important organization. But humanity had insisted, and the council had agreed to a probationary period. This was humanity's first major deployment. The human ship docked at the damaged station, and Ash prepared to brief their team leader. He expected confusion, perhaps some nervousness from such inexperienced responders. What he got was Dr. Sarah. She was shorter than most species in the IES, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that moved constantly, taking in everything. She wore a uniform marked with red crosses and carried a that looked primitive compared to the holographic systems the other species used. 3 dozen humans followed her, all moving with purpose. Coordinator Ash said, her translator rendering her words in perfect standard. "We're here to assist. Where do you need us?" Ash gestured with a crystalline appendage toward the holographic display. "We have 347 trapped individuals. Medical teams are working through sectors A through D. You may begin in Sector E. Please review our treatment protocols before you begin. Each patient must be properly assessed according to their species requirements and—" "How many have you saved?" interrupted. Ash paused. Interruption was considered quite rude among most IES species. "We have successfully stabilized 23 individuals in 12 hours. Our success rate is quite good, considering the complexity of—" 23 in 12 hours. Space did something strange. Her features tightened. "How many have died?" 37, regrettably. However, those individuals were already in critical condition when we arrived, and we was already moving. Her team followed her toward the damaged sections of the station, and Ash hurried to keep up. His crystalline form wasn't built for speed, and humans moved with an efficiency that seemed almost aggressive. They entered Sector E, where the rift had caused the most damage. Bodies lay in various states of injury. Some moaned in pain. Others lay still. The air smelled of burnt metal and the various biochemistries of a dozen species. Stopped and surveyed the scene for exactly 5 seconds. Then she started marking people. She moved from victim to victim, her making quick notes. On each person she placed a colored tag: red, yellow, green, black. Her team spread out behind her doing the same thing. The whole process took less than 10 minutes. Ash watched in growing confusion, which turned to horror when he understood what she was doing. "Doctor, what is the meaning of these tags?" Triage said, already kneeling beside a red-tagged victim, a young with severe internal bleeding. Her hands moved quickly, applying pressure, injecting something from her medical kit. "Red tags are immediate. They need treatment now or they'll die. Yellow tags are urgent but stable for the moment. Green tags can wait or treat themselves. Black tags are expectant. Expectant of what? Ash asked, though he feared he knew the answer. Expectant to die. Didn't look up from her work. They're too far gone. We can't save them, so we don't try. Ash felt his entire crystalline structure resonate with shock. You cannot simply abandon them. Every life has value. Every being deserves. Every being deserves our best effort to save the most lives possible, said. Her voice was hard. You've saved 23 people in 12 hours. I can save 200, but only if you let me work. She returned to her patient. Around the sector, her team was already treating the red tags. They worked fast, almost frantically. There was no careful assessment, no complete diagnostic. They just did what was needed to keep someone alive and moved on. It was brutal. It was efficient. It was completely against every protocol the IES had established. Ash moved to one of the black-tagged patients. It was an elderly Vox, a species known for their poetic wisdom. The Vox was conscious, eyes open, breathing shallow. This being is still alive, Ash said. You marked them to die, but they are alive. A human medic, a young man with tired eyes, knelt beside the Vox. He held the poet's hand. I know, the medic said softly. I'm sorry, your injuries are too severe. Your main organ cluster is failing. Even with our best equipment, you wouldn't survive the treatment. I'm staying with you. You won't be alone. The Vox looked at the human and made a sound like wind through crystal. The translator picked it up. You choose who lives. Yes, the medic said, his voice cracked. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Ash wanted to push the human aside to call for proper treatment, but he looked around the sector. In the 20 minutes since the humans had arrived, 8 red-tagged patients had been stabilized and were being moved to safety. 8 lives saved. In his 12 hours of proper protocol, he had saved 23 total. He watched work on a harmonious collective citizen, one of his own species. She was treating a compound fracture, setting the crystalline limb with quick, sure movements. No lengthy diagnostic, no proper imaging, just hands and eyes and experience making rapid decisions. The patient would live. The technique wasn't elegant, but the patient would live. By the 4-hour mark, the human team had cleared Sector E43 red tags treated and stable. 21 yellow tags stabilized and waiting for transport. 37 green tags bandaged and ambulatory. 14 black tags dead or dying, each one attended by a human who held their hand and whispered words of comfort even as the rest of the team moved on. Ash found as she was moving towards Sector F, Doctor, I must ask you to stop this practice. The Council of Infinite Compassion will not accept. I don't care what they accept, said. She was covered in blood from a dozen different species. Her hands shook slightly, but her eyes were steady. I care about how many people go home tonight. You can arrest me later. You can revoke Earth's membership. You can do whatever you want. But right now, people are dying and I know how to save them. She walked away. Ash stood in the corridor, his internal structure humming with conflict. Everything in his culture told him that what the humans were doing was wrong, immoral, a violation of the fundamental principle that all lives had equal value. But he couldn't argue with the results. By the time the harmonious collective leadership arrived to investigate the incident, his team had worked through 6 sectors. They had treated 209 individuals. 84 patients had died. Most of those were black tags who had been beyond saving before the humans even arrived. Some were red tags who didn't survive despite treatment. A few were yellows who had deteriorated faster than expected. But 209 lived, who would have died waiting for proper protocol. The investigation team was led by Ambassador of the Empaths. She was a tall, luminous being who literally radiated the emotional states of those around her. When she entered the medical bay and felt the pain, the loss, the grief of his team, she blazed with sorrow. You must explain yourself, doctor said. You have violated every standard of emergency medical care. You have made judgments about the value of lives. You have condemned beings to death without trial or review. Sat on a bench, her head in her hands. She hadn't slept in 28 hours. I condemned no one, she said quietly. I made choices, impossible choices, the kind of choices you avoid by taking 12 hours to save 23 people. And what gives you the right to make such choices? Looked up. Her eyes were red, but her gaze was steady. The math gives me the right, the numbers, the reality that in a mass casualty event you cannot save everyone, so you save who you can. We learned this on Earth. We learned it in wars and earthquakes and fires and floods. We learned it the hard way, with blood and tears and centuries of dead we couldn't save because we tried to save everyone equally. So you choose to save some and abandon others. No, stood. We choose to save the most. That's all. That's everything. We don't value some lives less. We value all lives so much that we'll make the terrible choice, we'll carry the guilt, we'll bear the weight of deciding because it means more people go home. Glowed with conflicting emotions. The Council will review this matter. Earth's membership in the IES is suspended pending investigation. You and your team will be brought before the tribunal. Nodded. Fine, but while you're investigating, people will keep dying under your protocols, and I'll keep seeing their faces, all of them. The ones I saved and the ones I couldn't. That's the price of this work. Ash watched the humans board their ship. He had spent 3 centuries believing in the absolute principle of equal treatment. But he had also spent 28 hours watching humans save lives at a rate he had never imagined possible. He didn't know which truth was stronger, but he knew which one had saved more people. The Council of Infinite Compassion convened in a chamber that existed partially in 12 dimensions at once. It was a place of pure logic and emotional clarity, where the galaxy's most ethically advanced species gathered to make judgments on matters of profound moral importance. Dr. Sarah stood in the center of the chamber, looking small and very human among beings of light, crystal, pure thought, and living mathematics. The prosecution was led by Ambassador and a panel of empaths from Sanctuary Prime. They had spent weeks preparing their case, documenting every decision's team had made at Station Theta 9. Now, they presented those decisions to the Council with devastating precision. Case File 7 said, and a holographic image appeared. A young mother, her body broken by falling debris. Age 23 local years, mother of 2 children. Doctor marked her with a black tag. Status, expectant to die, received no treatment and died within an hour. The empaths in the chamber glowed with shared grief. Continued. Our medical analysis shows that with proper intervention had a 17% chance of survival. Not a good chance, but a chance. Doctor her that chance. Said nothing. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the hologram of the dying mother. Case File 14 said, Hen, an elderly Vox poet, marked black. He was conscious and alert when doctor's team assessed him. He died without treatment. Our analysis suggests a 12% survival chance with aggressive intervention. Another hologram, another life ended. Case File 28. A young harmonious collective engineer, marked yellow and left to wait while red tags were treated, developed complications and died before receiving care. If treated immediately, survival chance was estimated at 73%. The cases went on. 84 deaths, 84 faces, 84 stories ended. The empaths wept openly, their luminous forms pulsing with the emotional weight of so much loss. Even the logical species like the architects and the seemed affected by the sheer volume of death. Finally, turn 2. Doctor, you stand accused of gross negligence, violation of medical ethics, and the unauthorized implementation of treatment protocols that prioritize some lives over others. How do you answer these charges? Stepped forward. I accept responsibility for every decision my team made. We used triage protocols that humanity developed over centuries. Those protocols are designed for mass casualty events where medical resources are insufficient to treat everyone. They are not perfect. They are not kind, but they save the most lives possible. At the cost of abandoning the unlucky, said. At the cost of making impossible choices, replied. She gestured, and her own holographic display activated. You showed me 84 people who died. Let me show you 209 people who lived. The display filled with faces. A harmonious collective worker whose shattered limb was set in minutes instead of the hours a proper diagnostic would have taken. A chorus hiveship member whose respiratory failure was treated with immediate intervention rather than waiting for the full assessment team. A human child pulled from debris, treated for shock, and reunited with his parents. On and on, 209 stories of survival. With your protocols, said, her voice steady and clear, Station Theta 9 would have ended with 312 dead out of 347 trapped. Those are your own projections based on the rate of treatment your teams were achieving. With Triage, 89 died, 258 lived. She paused, letting the numbers settle over the chamber. You're right that had a 17% chance of survival, but treating her would have taken 3 hours and required our entire trauma team. In those 3 hours, I saved 6 people with 90% survival chances. Do the math. 2 children lost their mother, but 6 other families stayed whole. You cannot reduce life to mathematics, said Sovereign, an architect whose form was pure geometric light. Each being is unique, irreplaceable, infinite in value. I agree, said. Every life is precious. That's exactly why we use triage, because we value life so much that we'll do the horrible calculation. We'll be the ones to decide. We'll carry that weight. We'll remember every face of every person we couldn't save, and we'll live with it because it means more people survive. But you become the arbiter of life and death, said. You place yourself above the natural order, above chance, above fate. No, his voice was sharp now. In a disaster, I don't create the shortage of resources. I don't cause the injuries. I just respond to reality. And the reality is that in mass casualty events, trying to save everyone equally means saving fewer people overall. Your protocols feel fair, but they let people die who could have lived. A member of the council spoke up, a being of living crystal whose thoughts resonated in harmonic frequencies. It was Coordinator Ash. I was present at Station Theta 9, he said. I watched both methods in practice. For 12 hours, my teams worked according to our established protocols. We saved 23 individuals. In 4 hours, the human team saved 43 in a single sector. I found their methods disturbing, even cruel, but I cannot argue with the outcome. The chamber fell silent. Ash continued, his voice resonating with emotion that his species rarely displayed publicly. I have served the IES for 3 centuries. I believed in our protocols absolutely, but Doctor taught me something difficult. She taught me that sometimes the most ethical act is not the one that feels right, but the one that achieves the most good. Our protocols are beautiful. They honor every life equally, but they are inefficient. And in emergencies, inefficiency is measured in corpses. You support this human barbarism? Asked an empath, glowing with surprise. I support saving lives, Ash said. If that requires making choices that break my heart, then my heart will break, but those I save will live. The council deliberated for 3 days, and her team waited in a holding facility, not quite prisoners but not quite free. Spent the time writing reports, documenting every decision, every choice, every calculation. She wrote down the names of all 84 people who had died. She wrote them by hand, in old-fashioned ink on paper, because she needed to feel the weight of each letter. On the 3rd day, the council summoned her back. Stood at the center of the chamber, her luminous form dimmed with exhaustion. Doctor, the council has reached a decision. We find that your methods, while effective, represent a fundamental departure from the ethical principles upon which the IES was founded. However, We also acknowledge that your methods achieved superior outcomes in terms of total lives saved. She paused and could see the struggle playing out in the empath's glow. Therefore, the Council makes the following ruling. Human triage protocols are hereby approved for use within the IES as an optional methodology. No species will be required to adopt these methods. However, training in triage will be made available to all member civilizations. Each species may choose whether to implement these protocols based on their own ethical frameworks. Felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly, and Earth's membership. Restored said, with one condition, humanity must establish a training program to teach other species your methods, and you must also teach them to bear the emotional weight of these decisions. We have seen how your people grieve for those you cannot save. That grief is important. It prevents the calculus from becoming cold. Nodded, we can do that. We've had a lot of practice carrying grief. Over the next 6 months, and her team taught triage to representatives from 40 different species. Some took to it naturally. The logical architects understood the mathematics immediately. Others struggled. The empaths of Sanctuary Prime found the emotional cost nearly unbearable. Several had to withdraw from training because marking someone as black-tagged caused them physical pain. But they learned. Slowly, carefully, with tears and arguments and late-night discussions about the nature of mercy, they learned. The real test came when the cascade collapse began. A chain reaction of dimensional instabilities hit 47 worlds simultaneously. It was the largest disaster in IES history. Projected casualties were in the millions. Every available team was mobilized. Coordinated from the central command, but she also deployed to one of the worst-hit areas, a colony world called New Harmony. The irony of the name wasn't lost on her as she surveyed the devastation. Entire cities collapsed, millions trapped, resources stretched impossibly thin. Her team included members from 12 different species now, all trained in triage. They moved through the ruins, marking victims, making choices, saving who they could. And they weren't alone. Across the disaster zone, other teams were using the same methods. Watched a young commander, her scales marked with the insignia of the defense fleet, working through a collapsed building. The commander marked a victim black, an elderly member of her own species, and saw her hands shake as she did it. But the commander moved on, treating a red tag, saving a life that would have been lost if she tried to save everyone. On the third day of the Cascade response, encountered Coordinator Ash in a field hospital. His crystalline form was dulled with exhaustion, and there were actual cracks in his structure, signs of extreme stress. "Coordinator," she said, "you should rest." "I marked 30 of my own people as today," Ash said. His voice resonated with pain. 30 of the harmonious collective. I knew some of them. I looked into their eyes and told them I could not help them because others had better chances of survival. "I'm sorry," said quietly. "Don't be." Ash's form pulsed with a complex emotion. "I saved 300 others. I did the calculation. I made the choice. And I will live with it just as you taught us to do." The Cascade collapse was eventually contained after 8 weeks of continuous response operations. The final casualty count was staggering, 2.3 million dead across 47 worlds. It was the worst disaster the IES had ever faced. But the initial projections had estimated 5.7 million deaths. 3.4 million beings were alive, because the galaxy had learned to make human choices. The memorial ceremony was held in the same multi-dimensional chamber where had faced the Council. But this time, she wasn't alone. Medical personnel from dozens of species stood with her, all bearing the same haunted look in their eyes, the same weight in their posture. The Council had commissioned a monument, a sculpture that existed partially in multiple dimensions. It showed a human medic kneeling beside a black-tagged patient, holding their hand. The figures were caught in a moment of connection, of shared humanity even in the face of death. The inscription was written in 87 languages but read the standard version. We honor those we could not save, and we honor those who bore the weight of choosing. In crisis, compassion is not the absence of hard choices. It is the courage to make them. Ambassador approached as the ceremony ended. The empath's glow was subdued, almost gray. I deployed during the cascade, she said. I marked my first black tag in week 2. A child from Sanctuary Prime, one of my own people. She was 6 years old. She had massive internal injuries. Saving her would have required resources that could save 8 others. I'm sorry, said, because there was nothing else to say. I held her hand as she died, continued. I felt her fear, her pain, her confusion about why we weren't helping her, and then I felt her peace as she let go, and after she died I treated the 8 others. 7 of them survived. His glow flickered, brightened slightly. I understand now what you tried to tell the council. The mathematics are cruel, but they serve mercy. The choices are impossible, but making them is an act of love, because we love life enough to break our hearts over and over to save as much of it as we can. Felt tears on her face. She didn't wipe them away. Welcome to the club nobody wants to join. Ash approached them, his crystalline structure still showing cracks from his work during the cascade. The council has approved the expansion of triage training programs, he said. 20 new facilities across dimensional space. They want humanity to oversee the curriculum. Of course they do, said with a tired smile. Because we're the experts in making terrible decisions. Because you learned first, Ash corrected. You learned through your own disasters, your own catastrophes. Now you teach us so we can bear this weight together. Around them, medical personnel from across the galaxy gathered. A chorus hiveship medic who had learned to make individual decisions that went against her collective consciousness. An architect whose perfect logic now included variables for grief and guilt. A young human fresh from training who had just worked his first mass casualty event and looked like he'd aged 10 years in a week. They were all broken in the same way, all carrying the same weight, but they carried it together. Looked at the monument, at the medic holding the patient's hand, and she thought about all the hands she'd held over the years, all the people she'd marked black, all the impossible choices, all the faces she saw when she closed her eyes. You know what the hardest part is, she said to no one in particular. It's not making the choice. It's living with the fact that you'll have to make it again, and again, and again. Every disaster, every crisis, every time there aren't enough resources and too many casualties. Yes, said a dozen voices around her, in a dozen languages, all translated to the same meaning. We know. The ceremony ended, but they stayed, this strange fellowship of the broken. They shared stories, traded techniques, grieved together for all the ones they couldn't save. They were the people who made impossible choices so others wouldn't have to. They were the ones who carried the weight so more people could go home. Later, as prepared to return to Earth, Ash found her one last time. Doctor, he said, I want to thank you for teaching us, for showing us that the highest form of compassion sometimes looks like cruelty, for demonstrating that loving all life means accepting we cannot save it all. Shook her head. Don't thank me, coordinator. This isn't a gift, it's a burden. We didn't teach you triage because we wanted to. We taught you because the universe is cruel and disasters happen and someone has to make the math work. I'm not proud of that, I'm just tired. Then be tired with friends, Ash said. His crystalline structure chimed softly. You taught us the method, yes, but you also taught us that we don't have to carry this weight alone. That across species, across cultures, across the galaxy, there are others who understand. Others who have held dying hands and made terrible choices and lived with the consequences. You created a community of the heartbroken. That may be the most human thing of all. Smiled despite her exhaustion. Maybe you're right, misery loves company after all. Not misery, Ash corrected. Purpose. We are broken so others can be whole. We carry grief so others can carry joy. We make the impossible choice so families stay together and children grow up and lives continue. If that is not purpose, I don't know what is. Boarded her ship. As it lifted away from the memorial site, she looked back at the monument, at the growing crowd of medical personnel from across the galaxy. They were broken, yes. They were tired and carrying weight that would never fully lift. But they were saving lives. More lives than any protocol or procedure or perfectly equal treatment ever had. They were making the hard choices, doing the terrible math, marking the black tags and living with the consequences. And they were doing it together. Somewhere in the galaxy, another disaster was happening. Another rift opening, another world shaking, another station failing. And somewhere medical teams were responding, pulling out colored tags, making impossible choices, grieving and saving and carrying on. The universe was cruel, disasters happened, people died. But because of triage, because of the terrible math, because of the humans who taught the galaxy to make hard choices, more people lived. More families stayed whole. More stories continued. That was the gift humanity gave the galaxy. Not hope or optimism or unity or any of the other noble ideals. Just the cold, hard, heartbreaking truth that sometimes loving life means accepting death, and sometimes saving the most means abandoning the few. And the courage to live with that truth. Closed her eyes and saw the faces. All 84 from Station Theta 9. All the ones from the Cascade. All the ones from every disaster she'd worked in her 20-year career. They were always there, always watching, always asking why. And her answer was always the same, because someone else lived instead, because the math worked, because the impossible choice was made. Because in a galaxy of infinite compassion, sometimes the most compassionate act was the one that broke your heart.